of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respect to their elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. I'm Claire Petrie, the chair of the panel. I was the former Energy and Water Ombudsman in New South Wales. Cassandra Goldie is the CEO of ACOS, and Andrew Richards is the CEO of Energy Users Association of Australia. The panel has received disclosures from 20 signatories to the Energy Charter, and we've discussed these with 19 CEOs. The purpose of this forum is for the panel to hear from you as consumers and consumer representatives to hear to what extent the disclosures represent your experience during 2020. We have people from the energy companies at this forum. They won't be speaking, but it's very valuable to hear for them to hear directly from their stakeholders. So just to recap, the Energy Charter was launched in January 2019, so we're now in its second year. In signing up to the Charter, the signatories have committed to 5 principles. We will put customers at the centre of our business and the energy system. We will improve energy affordability for customers. We will provide energy safely, sustainably and reliably. We will improve the customer experience, and we'll support customers facing vulnerable circumstances. Each of those principles is to be fulfilled through 24 more detailed principles in action. Signatories represent energy sector businesses across Australia and across the supply chain. So it goes from generation, transmission, distribution, retailers, both gas and electricity, and government-owned, privately owned and hybrid ownership. This year, we asked the signatories to really focus their disclosures to provide a realistic and transparent warts and all response. We didn't want to see a public relations document or hear about actions that signatories have to undertake in any case, for example, by law or regulation. We asked them to tell us how they went above and beyond the have-to requirements, including implementing the recommendations from the 2019 IAP report, how they measured any progress since their 2019 disclosures, and how the Better Together initiatives are working. Generally, the CEOs have acknowledged that there's still a way to go in their companies becoming truly customer-centric in their culture, approach, and systems. And those disclosures and the interviews with the CEOs are all up on the IAP website. But in the panel, wanting to hear from you about perhaps some of the not so good, it's important to acknowledge the good. 2020 has been an unprecedented year, with energy companies and their customers facing natural disasters, fire, flood, hail, drought, and then the COVID pandemic. And no one knows that more than you Victorians, so I hope you are all safe and well. Companies went above and beyond in keeping the power on, restoring it after infrastructure was burned out or flooded, providing generators where supply couldn't be restored quickly. They moved large numbers of staff to working from home without interruption to service and worked hard to keep their field staff safe and working. Many companies proactively stopped disconnections before they were required to do so. In our 19 meetings, the CEOs have shown a strong commitment to the Charter and have welcomed this independent review by the panel. They've acknowledged the importance of the Better Together initiatives on the basis that some problems can't be solved in isolation and need combined action and shared knowledge. Our final report will be published on the 4th of December this year. Before we turn the meeting over to you, it's worth us foreshadowing some of the themes that are emerging from the disclosures and our discussions with the CEOs. The first is in relation to Principle 1, we'll put customers at the centre of our business and the energy system. We're looking at how this principle is actually embedded in each company, from the board and executive level all the way through to the frontline staff. What customer metrics are in place to measure customer satisfaction and pain points? How far does cultural change go beyond mere words? We'll be interested in your experience here, particularly if you are a member of a customer consultative group or associated in any sort of consultation process. In the current COVID environment and economic downturn, we're particularly concerned about principles 2 and 5 that deal with energy affordability and customers in vulnerable circumstances. So Cassandra Goldie will just talk briefly about this.
Thanks, Claire, and good morning, everybody. Can I just acknowledge I'm on Gadigal land, and really great to see so many people from Victoria, particularly in light of where Victoria has been. Of course, we are very alive to the acute issues associated with affordability. And in the discussions we've had so far with the CEOs, we've been particularly looking at what have been some of the proactive measures that have been put in place to make sure that customers are getting the very best deals in terms of what's available. And of course, there's been some significant changes to access to particular rebates, concessions and supports. The underlying issues of to what extent we've got an eye on the trends associated with accumulation of debt and the critical risks there. There's been a bit of a view that the income support measures that have been put in place are kind of temporary and sort of holding pattern on us, potentially not yet dealing with what are some of the very serious affordability issues that will be quite widespread and on a scale potentially we've not seen, in this current market environment. And also what's proactively being done by the signatories to drive access to energy efficiency and distributed energy measures, which of course are systemic changes which some customers are getting access and great benefit from and others are not. And then just in the area of vulnerability, we have been talking to the CEOs about to what extent are they using big system changes to make sure that they are identifying people who are very likely to have acute vulnerability issues and being much more proactive about identification. Can I just finally flag, very interested to hear from you about what you see with the companies ensuring that they're embedding, I guess, the voice of the customer who's the most vulnerable customer in the heart of the governance and high-level decision-making of the companies, as distinct to kind of quite interesting but potentially off the side kind of engagement measures. So how much of that is sort of really impacting on the culture of the company? Thanks, Claire.
Thanks, Cass. Another key theme that has emerged this year is the issue of energy sustainability, and Andrew Richards will talk to that third energy charter principle.
Yeah, thanks, Claire, and thanks everyone for such a great turnout today. Yeah, so one of the questions we've posed, it sort of goes beyond the sustainability a little bit around net zero emissions by 2050, and obviously the energy industry being highly exposed to that. And it's really about, well, how do we transition the energy sector as in a broad base from where it is today, and we've started the transition to something that looks very different in 2050, or indeed we're getting a fairly strong indication that 2050 within the energy sector is probably going to look more like 2035 from a decarbonisation perspective, or 2040. So when people are making decisions about energy infrastructure that are going to live well beyond that time frame, it needs to be able to survive that time frame, but also take advantage of future opportunities. So there's been some really interesting discussions about that, and it's one of the themes coming out in reflecting, it's really a whole of supply chain issue. So it's not just generators needing to do this, but retailers and the networks as well. And when we talk about transition, it needs to be a just transition. And so when the energy industry talks about a just transition, they talk about their customers, of course, but also talk about their communities and their employees that they need to make sure that they're looking after on the way through as well. So I'd be interested to hear from you as community advocates and members of the community on whether you see or perceive energy companies dealing with the transition of the energy sector sufficiently. Do you think that there's some issues that they need to be more focused on than others? And whether they're giving consumers sufficient opportunity to participate in that transition as we go forward. So it's both a very big issue around what we invest in next, but it's also down at the granular level, at a household level, the big transition that's going on there and how we manage that, and whether energy companies are doing enough to help manage that transition. So I'd be interested to hear some feedback from you on that one. Thanks, Claire.
Thanks, Andrew. And so now it's really over to you to talk about your experiences, where you've found practices and conduct that are consistent with the Energy Charter principles, where they are not in alignment with the Charter, best practice examples from other service areas that you deal with, metrics that you think could be used to measure progress against the Charter, and how you think energy companies need to prepare for the potential affordability crisis outlined by Cassandra. So your input is invaluable in the panel critiquing the 2020 disclosures. The final thing to say is that we are aware of the pressure on consumer representatives. The industry is large. The consumer movement in the energy sector is small and constrained and very pressured. There are lots of demands on you. So if you want to tell us anything about that as well, that would be helpful. So now I'm going to hand it over to you. I can't see lots of you, so I don't know, I can't tell when you want to speak. I also can't see everyone on the screen because there are very nicely so many of you. So if you want to say something and I can't spot you, can you use the chat function to let us know that you would like to say something? And then, or the panel will text me. So we'll muddle through it as best we can. So would someone like to start with comments? Now, as I said, I can't see everyone.
Hello, Claire. This is Jared Lenny from Victorian Council of Social Service. Happy to send up an opening question. It's often a cold start on a Thursday morning.
That's great, Jared, because I was about to pinpoint you anyway. So that's fantastic. Thank you. I'm
not sure if that quite counts as first mover advantage on my part then. I was interested in the panel's reflections, actually, looking at the reports this year. This is my first year in the energy landscape, personally. And so I've been reflecting on the reports, but also understanding the context. Do you feel like the themes that you identified in last year's 2019 assessments have been picked up? Because there's a lot of layers to the Energy Charter because it's a complex sector, and the issues around putting the customer at the centre are also complicated. So I was just interested to know whether you feel that those themes were adequately reflected, or were there areas of good practice, particularly on the alignment with the Charter principles?
Well, in answering your question, I will throw it back to you because we want to hear your experience, but that's certainly one of the things that we're looking at. The whole point of the Charter is to track progress, not just reports year by year. So we have to see definite change, and it's not always reflected in the reports. And the reports, the first year, the disclosures were very long and a bit unfocused, and the panel's report was quite long in response. And that was the first year finding its feet, establishing the ground. This year, we insisted that the disclosure reports be a maximum of 10 pages and much more focused. So that obviously led to some constraints in what they could say, but we think it's been a much better process. So that's exactly what we'll be looking for in our analysis of whether the recommendations from last year were taken up and what progress has been made against them.
If I could just add to that.
Yes, thanks.
Just a little, Jared, great to see you. Really great to see the causes involved. I think there is an understandable recognition from everybody that this last 12 months was not as predicted, right? You know, and so the huge impacts, of course, of the bushfires on some of the signatories and the way in which they were operating, and then of course COVID, and to what extent, of course, on workforce as well. I'm not underestimating that. And so I think we are genuinely trying to assess to what extent, in light of those major crises events, we have seen reasonable progress on some of the most critical issues that you would in some ways expect a crisis to accelerate change as a result of, to really highlight that. So that's where hearing your observations is really crucial, because of course, I don't think we can underestimate for any business some of the impacts of, you know, converting a workforce overnight into working from home, and what that might have done to the great laid plans of even, you know, the highest of those companies engaged with the signatory, the sort of the charter process. And I think the second question is with the working together, the Better Together initiatives, trying to get a sense from any of you that might be involved in that of to what extent you see there is value in that. I think everybody's aware, and those that are sort of championing the charter from within the companies as well, that this could be a kind of a very paper-thin process. And nobody wants to lose confidence that these actually are processes that are useful for advocates to help drive the changes that we would want to see. So that's a really key question for us. And I think it was much harder to know that in year one because it was so new. And we're just aware that these couple of big events have probably meant a few things didn't happen that were planned.
Claire, if I can just add to Jared, it's one of the things that we struggled with last year was to try and get a common set of metrics in which to make an evaluation for companies to evaluate themselves against. So that's where the maturity model has popped out. And this is an evolutionary process, and it's certainly still got some way to go. So this year, what we're seeing is the first attempt by the companies themselves to do a self-evaluation on their maturity model. I guess the next step is to try and get some more independent evaluation on that as well, to make sure that if someone's ranked themselves with 5 gold stars, that they're actually, that's the general perception from consumers, that they should get 5 gold stars. So I think the maturity model is a great step to try and get some common metrics and common understanding across the industry, but that needs to evolve as well. It has to move, I guess, perhaps a little bit beyond just a pure self-evaluation, and that's where groups like yours and others are really important to basically fact check against that evaluation as well. So that's it's part of this ongoing evolution of the process, but at least there's a process to evolve, right? As opposed to a couple of years ago when there wasn't one. So I think it's a positive step.
So Jared, would you like to make some comments about?
Claire, thank you. I think just to follow on that, you know, how the evolution could continue, because I absolutely take the point. You know, it's not intended to be at day one the solution to everything. It's a journey. The thought that it's occurred to me looking at the disclosures and thinking about Cassandra's point about how do we make sure the consumer voice is taken forward is the possibility of including in the disclosures a self-assessment or a separate assessment from the consumer panel or equivalent of those organizations, because, you know, as you say, there's lots of signatories, and those who are closest to them will be perhaps better able to make some informed comments about which initiatives have had more promise than show on paper, perhaps. That'd be my only other introductory comment, Claire, at this stage.
Thank you. Who else would like to say something? I'm sorry, I can't see hands. No. There was a...
Maybe just pose a more specific question. We're really keen to know to what extent you think the signatories have responded to the accelerating crisis on affordability. And, you know, I just really want to get a sense from you of those of you who've been involved in that kind of work. And if you've got any comments about some of the good things that you've seen happen, or where you've been disappointed that there was not the action, or there's not the action happening because you are worried about what's coming?
Cassandra, I can probably add something there of value, I hope.
Great.
My name's Doug Payne. I represent 35,000 small to medium businesses as an intermediary. And I'll talk to you quickly about things that have worked well and things that haven't worked so well. So I think the retailers have done an exceptional job at handling this hardship for small to medium enterprises. Whilst it isn't perfect, they've certainly put the customer at the forefront of what they're doing, and are negotiating with the customer at every possible opportunity to support them on a payment plan, write down some of the debt, or just completely hold it off. So I have taken my hat off to the retailers who effectively hold all of those bills. They're holding everybody's bills, and they're absorbing some of those hits, and they're negotiating with customers directly and making sure they just don't get disconnected on essential power. I just think it's a phenomenal job. And I think they're doing really, really well for small to medium and commercial and industrial. Let's add them to the conversation, just purely because the small to medium businesses by makeup, but because we call them commercial and industrial customers because of their consumption behavior, the reality is they're just SMEs. And they're going through the same problem as everybody else. Where I think it hasn't worked so well is on the other parts of the invoice. So as you know, retailers make up about 45% of the bill on any sort of bill. However, there are other charges on an invoice that we have struggled to talk to what I call the great and powerful Oz, or the man behind the curtain. You get no access to these people. And I'm talking about all the other charges. So I'm not going to discriminate against anybody. I'm just going to say all the other charges on the bill. There just isn't any, there's no communication. There's no support. Some of the network adjustments just aren't being done in a timely fashion, and these are mothballed or dormant sites that have excessive supply charges, and they just need to be supported. The customer needs to be at the forefront of what they're doing. So look, I hope that's enough to get some conversation stimulated. That's a good, great, and what we call a good grow in the industry. But overall, I think it's been one of the most trying periods I think I've ever worked in energy, but it's been one of the most exciting because it's driving conversation, good conversation about energy. I love it.
Doug, could I just ask you, given, and we agree, the feedback is that the companies have been good about holding debt, trying to come to arrangements with their customers. And it's the same in the banking area with mortgages being moratorium on mortgages, etc. But what happens, but a lot of that has also been supported by the government assistance programs, JobKeeper and all the rest of it. What we're concerned about is what happens when all that support is reduced or withdrawn. What's going to happen to your clientele then? And how do the energy companies deal with it then? Do they just continue to carry the debt, write off debt? How do you see things in the future? Yeah,
look, I mean, great question. Look, it's clear, it's inevitable that things are going to eventually be shut off. It's like JobKeeper / JobSeeker. I mean, you know, they will get pulled eventually. I think they're pegged for March, and in those circumstances, the companies that we deal with every day that are currently in hardship, it's a compounding problem. And every single month when an invoice gets added to the outstanding debt, it becomes harder and harder for these small to medium businesses to get themselves across the line. You know, payment plans and extensions are the one way that they can get out of this troubling period, and it may take 12 months genuinely to see the light of day as they try to rebuild their business. Particularly, you know, talking to a Victorian audience, I've joined this meeting because I missed the Sydney one. I'm in Sydney, but I understand, having lived in Victoria for my whole life up until 3 years ago, I get the pain that Victoria is going through. They're going to open back up, and then they're going to struggle with only 25% occupancy, and that will take a while for them to build a bit of cash flow back in their business to pay these debts. So look, the reality is that the companies are doing everything in their power at the moment to try and support them, but they can only hold out for so long. It's a we problem. And unfortunately, at the moment, I'm seeing the retailers hold the responsibility and the burden for this issue. And I'm speaking only because they're the only ones that I talk to. I will just quickly mention that during this COVID-19 period, Sabine had created a working group on a code of conduct for intermediaries and retailers. And it's because of that code of conduct, that working group that Sabine spearheads, we are able to communicate as a community these issues and get through them. Without that, I don't think we would have had the same outcome for our customers. And so we've done some great things on creating a good working together agreement or a code of conduct. And I think it's going to be super powerful in the coming weeks as we launch that to the market and have everybody sign on to it. So that's been a massive help. Just opening the doors of communication right now, like this working group today, will hopefully help in the long run. So I guess in short, the answer is I can see this becoming a compounding issue. And if we don't start to make the right steps between now and March, it's going to be a real issue across the NEM. We're going to have shutdowns. We're going to have people holding outstanding debt. It's going to be occupied debt for retailers. It's going to have network businesses that are not perhaps getting their charges that they need to support the infrastructure around them. It's a wee problem.
Thank
So
you very much.
It's really interesting, that last comment there, Doug, particularly because what struck us last year was the realization that the energy industry value chain doesn't always talk to each other very much, and that there were CEOs who'd never met each other, which seemed quite extraordinary considering they're all part of this sort of the customer delivery aspect. And
Yeah.
they did say that the energy charter itself has actually created those spaces for conversations and for those relationships to perhaps build. So I'm really pleased to hear, because the EUAA, we're a very strong supporter of a code of conduct for brokers and third parties, because they are extensions of the energy companies. So it's fantastic to hear that aspect through the Better Together initiative has really driven a different outcome or a different conversation, which is positive. So that's good to hear. Do you get a sense though that people are worried about, the energy industry is worried about next year, but are they doing sufficient planning really? And is there a role for government in that? And indeed, you talk about the retailers just holding the bag. Do you think there is a role for the entire value chain to share more of that risk going forward? So spread some of that bad debt, if you like, if that's the right way to put it, across the broader value chain.
Yeah, okay, absolutely. Andrew, is it?
Yes.
It's Andrew Richards.
Yes.
Andrew, I emailed you last week about this exact same topic.
Oh, did you?
Yeah. Okay. So the reality is that I think we even you and I have attempted to connect, but still failed to do so. So the I'm saying is that we all absolutely need to come together to fix this problem. I think starting with the energy charter and then working through the chain of connection to customer. The customer is where the pivotal point is, and I think it almost ends. The role of an energy retailer is almost like a bill payer and receiver. And I'm sorry to downplay that, but the reality is it's a collector of bills and then sends it out to the customer, packages it up, comes back, and we fix everybody up for their charges. And having worked working for a retailer, I understand the role that I played. So to answer your question, yes, there needs to be government intervention in here. Yes, there needs to be open communication and open dialogue between all the parties. I'm shocked that CEOs don't know each other. I think I know most CEOs in the intermediary space, my space, because we get out and we talk about real issues, and we talk about real issues we're trying to solve. And this is a major problem, almost a blessing in disguise, for lack of a better term, with COVID-19, because it's forced us to come together. It's forced us to have really hard conversations with each other. And I'm not talking about, price or this or that. I'm talking about how do we solve a problem with the consumer not being able to pay their bill. The reality is now nobody gets any money. And the generators are stuck holding generation, contracts for customers that can't fulfill their obligations. You've got retailers that are holding everybody's debt at the moment and working out who's going to pay for it because the customers aren't paying them the money. Poles and wires, again, to be able to protect their infrastructure moving forward, they just won't make the money that they would to be able to protect the infrastructure moving forward. So Andrew, it's definitely a problem. And it's not just focused on the residential property. And I feel like as a small to medium business representative here in this community, I feel like there's not been a big enough voice for that consumer group. We see the rules and regulations sort of cap out at 40 megawatt hours. I mean, the average small to medium business in the NEM is 27 meg, so the average customer gets it. But the second that you start consuming, I don't know, $7,000, $8,000 a year, I mean, you're out of the loop. You're out of the conversation. You're not at the table, and I find that that's the worst thing about our industry, is that we don't protect the consumer. We protect them based on consumption behavior, and that's not the right thing to do. This is a NEM problem, and I think the NEM needs to come together and handle it.
Just found your email, Doug. So apologies for not.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. We'll talk.
Let's set up a Zoom call.
Love it.
And get into that, because I think you're right. I mean, we do a fair bit of work on gas as well, and there's a question here on gas in the chat, because there's a whole cohort of energy users in the gas market that just don't have a voice, and they're the ones who, and they don't have the skills inside their business to manage energy. Where if you're using $1 million a week, then you're pretty switched on. But there's a whole cohort of energy users
in between that. I agree with you, Andrew. You're right.
Don't have the skills or the understanding. You've got a poor purchasing manager trying to manage this, and so I think there's a more of a role where the industry can come together with that cohort of customers, because that small to medium enterprise, they're the ones that are suffering the most under COVID. They're the ones that are going to struggle hard, have more of a struggle to come out of it as well.
To get out of it. Yeah, I agree with you. Absolutely 100%. The email that I shot you through was a forward email that I sent through to the big three retailers. And it was specifically an idea that I come up with to support the network costs. So nothing to do with you per se. It was just more me just reaching out because you represent the commercial and industrial customers on the EUAA as part of the Synergy Charter. So I thought, great, let's talk, because they're a pass-through charge and these customers are still having to foot the bill with their network costs. It went on, nobody responded to the idea. And it's probably because we're busy being busy, and I understand that and appreciate that. But the reality is that we need to come together in a forum like this to discuss ideas and which ones are, going to help the customer the most in a situation like this get out, because I think we all want businesses to survive right now.
Jared, I think you wanted to make a comment, and then Andrew, I might come back to you to talk about that gas question, because it really goes to the question of affordability of gas. And I know gas, a lot of consumers in Victoria rely on gas. So I'll come back to you, but Jared first.
Thanks, Claire. It was just to come back, I think, to Cassandra's question about affordability in the COVID context. And I keep thinking that they're overlapping, because of course a lot of the affordability drivers are ongoing policy and regulatory and retailer efforts to improve operating costs. So what I've been reading, both the submissions for, but also things like the Essential Services Commission in Victoria, it has a consumer stakeholder roundtable this afternoon, as it happens, and they'll be presenting their latest data on the information they're getting from retail companies on hardship plan rates and deferral rates. I've been quite nervous about deferrals as opposed to payment plans, particularly for those households on low incomes or short-term increased income support, having the opportunity to pay those energy bills as soon as possible, getting onto quick, shorter billing cycles. And it was good to see in a few of the submissions, the disclosures, references to what's being done with the retailers' data sets to identify and work in an early intervention model with customers at risk of experiencing payment difficulties, because it's always better if we can keep people out of the system or get them into a payment plan rather than deferring a bill when income support will drop off. So I'm just mindful that there's that other data set around the context of these disclosures, being the data the Essential Services Commission is gathering on the way the hardship payment system works in Victoria, and also obviously the Energy and Water Ombudsman data as well. There's other references that could be cited, I think, in reviewing the reports.
Thank
you. I do want to acknowledge the We Got You campaign. Things like that have been really important. One of the questions in Victoria has been, how do we get messages through to people in what is a really unusual communication environment? It's always, everyone talks at the moment about how much noise there is within news media and other sources. It's even stranger, I think, in the last 6 months in Victoria, where we've both got that and the lockdown experience.
Thank you, Jared. Andrew, gas prices, affordability of gas.
Yeah, look, I mean, thanks, Claire. The discussion around gas has really tended to focus on large commercial industrials. So the people are basically spending, well, we talked about $1 million a week. We've got some gas users who spend $1 million a day on gas. So, and they're big employers and they make lots of stuff that we use every day. So the conversations and a lot of the government announcements and focus has been around sort of helping those big gas users. But as Doug and I were talking about just before, there's a whole range of medium-sized gas users who don't have the wherewithal to actually manage this issue of a gas price going from $4 a gigajoule to $12 a gigajoule in the space of 12 months. And then when you talk about the residential level, then there's a whole lot of people with heating load in Victoria, particularly over winter, who are just cop the gas bill. And particularly now when we've all been sitting at home, I've got a big house and I feel like I've been supporting gas companies individually when I look at our gas bill. It's a really difficult question to answer. We basically didn't have domestic reservation when we started exporting LNG, and that like they have in WA, and that's protected Western Australian customers from floating LNG prices on the international market. So a lot of effort, we need to focus more. And I think this question is from Dale. I'm happy to catch up with you later on, Dale, to talk about this because it is quite complex. At the bottom line is we need to improve competition in the gas market. We need to increase supply. We need to increase the number of people supplying it. We need to increase gas carrying capacities through pipelines. So they're the things that increase competition. But then when we circle back to my early comments on net zero by 2050, if you're wanting to build a 50-year gas pipeline, then you've got to try and work out a way that survives net zero emissions by 2050, because gas produces emissions. Because we don't want a stranded asset. So we don't want in 2050 a gas pipeline with still 30 years to operate being written off, or we don't want consumers continually paying for that when there's no gas going through it. So there's no easy answer to that. And I know a lot of people are thinking about alternate fuels, and I'd be interested to hear what people think about alternate fuels and biogas and hydrogen. But these are some of the big issues that the industry is grappling with. And our questions and our, I guess, challenge to them is how do you make the transition without blowing up a customer's bill, without actually creating more energy poverty, without putting people out of business? They're very much alive to that, but the answers are still yet to come. So if there's any smart ideas out there, then that'd be great to hear them, because we do need to start focusing on, when it comes to gas, second, third and fourth layers of customers, not just the big guys. And that doesn't answer the question, but it just probably poses more, but it's pretty complex, unfortunately.
Thank you, and thanks for the question.
Then, just anything on the energy efficiency or distributed energy front. I think these are a couple of key areas where definitely in terms of affordability, and as we try, move to cleaner energy sources, driving down energy bills sizes for people who are struggling to pay them, and where you assess signatories have got to on that. Matt, hi. Is that Matt from Uniting?
Yes, it is. Sorry, I was distracted putting out some spot fires. Could you repeat the question?
Yeah, just I'm particularly keen, as we, obviously want to see us moving to clean energy sources as rapidly as we can, what we're doing on the sort of energy efficiency and also distributed energy fronts, which of course are a couple of key measures to improve affordability. And are we seeing the kind of action that you would expect from signatories to help on those fronts?
Well, personally, we've been involved with AGL to deliver a solar program for community houses in New South Wales. So that's one of the big things that we're really keen on seeing a lot more of, is support for households who actually will be able to take most advantage of that solar production, instead of people who will be mostly, in an office somewhere else and not actually being able to access that electricity production during the day. So I think that's where one of the examples of a good targeted support program can be implemented. So I think that's something we'd really be keen to see more of as well. Because I mean, the issue we've got at the minute is, lots of people put solar on their properties, but then don't utilise that power, and it just goes back into the grid. But it causes issues with the network and the pricing through the day, because there's so much floating around the system. Whereas if people can actually utilise it in their house while they're there, then that's a better benefit for that client.
Matt, do you have some general comments, given that you are from a fairly major not-for-profit organisation? Have you got any general comments on consumers and energy and the approach of energy companies, particularly in this environment?
Yeah, I think, I can't remember who it was mentioning it earlier, it might have been Doug, just like the ability for the network to sort of change really rapidly when COVID hit to support people was amazing. We just want to sort of see that support continue on post, whenever COVID sort of disappears or reduces to a minimal amount. But the protections that were put in place, I think, should just be standard at the moment. They should just roll on. So that disconnection issue is going to be massive in the next few months. And it's, a lot of people are waiting for that sort of to pop up in the background. So for us, it's, if there's any supports that retailers and distributors, and one of the great things was the distributors in Victoria just got together and said, we're not disconnecting anyone unless they actually specify that they want that done, their household wants that done. So that was a great protection, and we'd like to see that sort of continue on. And I think if people were threatened with disconnection, that there should be a lot of extra supports to sort of go through before that's used as a last resort. So I think necessity is the best way to sort of get some of these processes in place, and I think that should sort of continue on.
Thank you, Matt.
Claire, it's Jared. It's just an observation. The community sector in Victoria has quite a bit of operational expertise in energy assistance, bill brokerage, but also advice on energy efficiency. So I've really noted there's a number of the retail companies are doing energy advice, supports and guidance, but there's perhaps opportunities for partnering there, particularly when consumers in vulnerable circumstances may not have a naturally positive approach to a private retailer and may be more willing to work with a community organisation. So it's just one of those opportunities for future collaboration.
I think that is a very strong message. As I said in the introduction, problems are not going to be resolved by one group alone. And I think it is really a matter of partnerships and working together in the way that you describe. We're also concerned about whether there are customer groups who are missing out. There is a lot of engagement occurring, but the companies rightly say that it is hard to help if there is not that engagement. And sometimes the engagement is because of language difficulties or cultural difficulties where people aren't able to reach out because they don't understand the system or are a bit intimidated by it, etc. So do you have any views on unmet need, groups that have been missing out, where more attention needs to be paid?
Claire, it's Matt again. I think you nailed it on the head there. The biggest group that we're finding is struggling the most at the moment is the core community and asylum seekers and international students. They've really struggled to get any access to supports. There are some supports out there, but a lot of these clients have never had to navigate an energy market before. And when everything, the majority of the information is in English, and some of these, these clients don't actually have literacy in their own language, apart from speaking it. It makes it really difficult to get that message out there. So I think it goes back to that trusted sort of partnership set up as, working with called organisations who are on the front line with those clients to push that message through will really help to build the trust within those communities on the fact that the support is there and that they can access it and they can get it in language and through different means instead of just a flyer or a social media post or whatever it is that is sort of coming at the moment. So I think that's definitely one of the areas that we've noticed a massive concern in.
Thanks, Matt. Now I'm looking to see.
Hi, this is Lois from the Australian Energy Foundation. Just want to add to what Matt was saying there, just around the experiences with people experiencing digital disadvantage. So got all these who are not engaged online, and where you will find most of your members, right, access to all of that information, different numbers for code communities, but you can't access that if you don't have the tools. And so even with switching, which is obviously something that we need for affordability, people are still struggling to engage because then you have to get this deal if you're on an online membership or if you're paying online, and people just don't do that. People are comfortable going to the post office and paying fortnightly, etc. And so we are still leaving people behind by trying to make things easier for the more people that are engaged. Those that are not engaged are still left behind. And as a customer of Gemini myself, I would like to say that just during COVID, when I was experiencing a power outage issue, that they were very responsive because they were aware that we're all working from home, etc. And just the fact that you would have turnaround of 2 hours, someone to come out to your place and have a look at what's wrong and then able to assist you within the next day. I thought that was really great of them to be able to do. One of the things around affordability that I noted when I was reading the documents is obviously that early identification for people that are facing hardship. It will be great to see your members focusing more on silent hardship. People that are going without. They're still keeping with their bills, keeping a pace with their bills, but unfortunately, because they struggle to pay the bills if they're using the amount of power that they need, we're finding that people get sick more often during winter than they should because they're going without. So it'd be great to see how or what members can do to be able to identify those people ahead of time to be able to provide the right assistance.
That's a really important observation, of course. Can I pick up, do you have any views, because of course, if there's not been a change in the pattern of energy use, but what we know from other sources is that is the household is going without other things in order to continue to keep the lights on and etc. What are the other indicators you would want to see or expect from retailers, for example, to be able to kind of identify where people may be in trouble? Do you think, for example, when we talked earlier about metrics and kind of trying to get some more agreed basic metrics of what should be tracked. So, for example, delay in paying bills. If there is a particular trajectory over the delay in payment, that's an indicator. Any other thoughts you've got on that?
I think it will be difficult without understanding the demographics of a household.
Yeah.
So we know typically what a 2-person household should be consuming or a 3-person household. But if there was a way of saying, we know exactly how many people are under this house and they're consuming significantly less than they should, then those are some of the people that we need to be communicating with and providing information around energy efficiency, yes, but that you can get support in A, B, C, and D. So it probably needs to be at that technical level, but so that you can pick up some of those behaviors that are hidden because you don't see that on the other side of the bill.
Thank you.
I think just to add to that as well, like Victoria's in a pretty good position where we have smart meter data. We can the distributors can access that. So I think from a distributor level, if they can, during winter, if they know that there's a property that is all electric, that doesn't have gas connected, and it's a really low consumption level during winter, but there's enough there to indicate that there's somebody at home, then that could be a point of like saying, okay, maybe there's a potential energy poverty issue here, and we can forward that to the retailer so they can have a conversation, or the distributor can actually have that direct conversation as well with that client or that householder, just to see if there's any support that they might need around how they're using their power at that point in time, and whether they need extra supports from community orgs or councils or whatever support programs they might need. So we are pretty lucky with that, with having that across the state, and being able to access that data.
So Matt, Andrew here. So do smart meters make that much of a difference? And because in other states, participants will say, "Oh, we don't have the same level of data," but they still do collect data, and they still should be some early warning signs. But the question is are smart meters that much of an advantage in providing an early warning signal?
Yeah, so I mean, it's a real time, 30-minute, 15-minute real time access of information. So, and you can see good trends through that. So you can see when someone gets up and turns the lights on in the morning, or uses the heater at whatever point in the day. So that gives a really good richness to that data. I think if you're waiting for a distributor to do a meter read every 2 months or 3 months, then you've missed all that trend data through that period. So yeah, I think Victoria's in a really good position to be able to access and do some really clever things with what information is out there.
So we can do clever things with that granularity. Are we doing clever things with the granularity?
I know. One of the distributors in Melbourne was really targeting their communication through COVID based on, because they can't do it to they can do it to a block level. So they don't unless you specify, hey, can you give me some information on this property or these properties? They'll aggregate that, but they won't give you specific information on a property. But they can see trends in the area. So like, say a block is using a lot more electricity than another area, they can actually target that information on energy efficiency or supports to that specific cohort. So yeah, so it's it'd be great if it could get down to house level, but there's probably some privacy issues and stuff.
Okay. Andrew, I think I could probably just jump in there quickly, having working in metrology as well. I had that experience. No, we're not doing anything at all with that information, if I'm being blunt. I wish we could. I wish in a hardship program, what Matt's touching on is that we can get that data, introduce the cents per kilowatt hour, and predict the customer's consumption before it happens, so that they can budget for it better. I wish they could change to a time of use tariff, one that suits their consumption behavior and pattern in real time, so that they don't have to wait for a bill, be charged on a peak only, and give them the option to transfer into a peak, off peak, and shoulder. So in reality, it's good to have a smart meter, but it doesn't really do much unless you're doing something with the data. So it's a loaded question, a really important question to ask. And in a situation like what we're in at the moment, if we can tell somebody that their bill is going to come out at $400 and they've only got a $300 budget for it, we could help them.
Mm. Yeah, it does seem that there's this conversation about big data that's going on. And when you say in another part of the market, you understand with all this solar, lots of solar coming in, it's at 3,000 and 4,000 megawatts of unregulated power coming into the system effectively. And so the data that's required for the system operator to manage that and for networks to manage that, I think, is probably there. But as I think you just pointed out, we're probably not at the point where we can use that as actively and as to the benefit of consumers that we possibly should. So maybe obviously a lot more work needs to be done there.
There's a huge tech piece that's coming. I just don't know whether or not anyone has the silver bullet yet. I can't wait for it, but I'm super excited to see what networks can do with it. I worked at AusNet, and we did some great stuff on mini grids and sharing of power and supply, switch-based technology. Look, I love that. I love that topic of discussion. We're data rich and insights poor.
Yeah.
Thank you, Doug. I think Jenny, you would like to say something. Can you just tell us where you're from? I'm not sure what SIS means.
Okay, I'm a financial counsellor support worker at the Cranbourne Information Support Service. I just wanted to put in dealing with clients. Often they come for emergency relief because they've just had to pay a utility bill. And if it's something that they can manage themselves, that's fine. Otherwise, they'll get referred to me and we'll have a look and see what they can afford, and you know, if it's still got arrears type of thing. Especially at this time of the year, gas bills have gone up with heating on that, but they'll flatten out again over the summertime. But generally, it's just the general cost of the energy that is the problem. Their usage hasn't changed, but the cost of it's gone up, and it's put it out of their budget, especially if they're on Centrelink benefits and that. A few years ago, I had a lovely old lady that would use a torch in the night time to go around, but she had the lights on in the daytime on that. So, you know, sometimes it's a discussion about usage and what, you know, the cost of different things. And again, with the cold community, that's it. They just sort of don't always understand the bills and usage. And if you've got teenage children, are the worst users, because, you know, you flick a switch and, you know, you don't see the cost of it going up. So that's often a conversation I'll have with families. I had that with my own children many years ago, and my son apologised when he went up to Darwin into his own unit and realised the cost of electricity and what the big arguments were, you know, 5 years before. So, yeah, it's a very tricky one.
Jenny, how have you found have you had to contact energy companies on behalf of your clients? And if so, how have you found their response?
All the time on that. One of probably my most frequent calls would be to different energy companies. A lot depends on the individual you get at the other end of the phone. I find international call centres can be very frustrating, and it can take half an hour to ask for a utility relief grant form to be sent out. You go from department to department. They have improved, I think, over the years, but sometimes there's not an understanding of hardship. The first line people just want to get on a payment plan without any recognition that they may have other bills to pay, or they'll get a phone call or a message to say what they're paying is no longer enough. You must put it up to, you know, from $50 to $70, which is not, you know, a realistic budget for them. Or if they stay at the same level, as I said, over the summer months when the usage is lower, they will catch up again with it. It's all individual. You can't use a broad sweeping statement to say this will fix everybody on that. It's doing the compares from one company to the next. The compare website is really good, but it can also be very confusing as well for some people. I've did it quite a few with people, with clients when I was allowed to see them, and explain what it was. That a lot of people don't have the means to do it online, and that takes out, you know, especially it seems to be a lot of the newer retailers, because that's the only way that they work. So it's often the bigger ones that I sort of get them to defer to, because I judge a retailer on their hardship program and how I deal with them on that. Sometimes even more so than their rate on that, because that's my experience. But they're engaging with Financial Counselling Victoria a lot. We're doing forums and talking to them, so we are getting to explain hardship and what their customers are experiencing and what we're experiencing. We're trying to help them, which is really good on that, so that they are listening to us and trying to do it. But as I said, sometimes it's the overseas call centres that you just want to hit your head against the wall, because it's all you want is a 5-minute conversation to get a utility relief grant, and you've got to go through so many hoops and departments. So but we'll get there.
Jenny, do you have any comments on, obviously the people coming to see you may already be in a difficult situation. How can retailers better identify customers in need of some assistance before it gets to crisis point?
I don't know. There's a balance between seeing issues and privacy on that. A lot of people don't like being cold called by any sort of retailer saying, you know, you're using more, or, you know, this is what your bill's going to be. I could see a lot of people taking offence by that. It's that I understand that you can do it. I'm involved with a community forum with Southeast Water, and they're looking at getting smart meters which will identify leaks, for example, which I think sounds like a great idea. But you can't quite do the same always with gas and electricity, you know, that there is an issue there that's, you know, causing a problem. Yeah, I don't know what the answer to that one is. When customers call, they need, I think, better but gentle questioning needs to find out if this bill is their only issue or whether it's just part of a bigger issue. Because as I said, doing a payment plan for one bill, it only satisfies that bill, and it might make them hard to do it. As I said, people come for emergency relief for food vouchers because they've just paid their normal bills. So, yeah, and if we identify them, as I said, they'll get referred to me, and we'll look at their whole, you know, whole lot of bills on that. So, yeah.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Thank you. Other comments?
Hi, it's Robin here, and I'm joining just as I guess a residential consumer, and I've been speaking to Sabine, so I think I hadn't heard of the Energy Charter until recently. I think it's absolutely fantastic that the industry is coming together in this way, and I know there's a long way to go. But just to share some of my experiences, I guess I joined through my retailer. When I first joined about a year ago, I did get a text at one point saying your bill's likely to be around this much if you keep, you know, behaving in the same way, or whatever it was. It was quite a nice text anyway, and I thought it was great. But interestingly, I've never had one again. So I thought it was really, really good. And yet I've come into COVID, and my last bill was way bigger because obviously I've been home the whole time. And yet that messaging had stopped. And so to the point of smart meters before, if they've got that intel, which they must have because they've done it before, I don't know why they stopped sending that message. And probably the other area, just thinking about being customer focused, is just the frequency of the billing as well. I'm not sure, you know, most billing that you get through other industries, it's monthly or whatever. I don't seem to have a choice with the energy sector, and maybe that's because normally they've traditionally had to go out and read the meters. But if we don't need that anymore in Victoria, I'm not sure why we couldn't maybe ask for different frequency of bills. But maybe you can, I just can't see how. And when I did get my bill, there's nothing overtly on there about if I need help, you know, this is how you can ask for it, which I know some other sectors, they do sort of be more proactive in sort of saying you can get some help if you need it. And I understand, like, the industries, they've got to make money as well. But if you're to the point of other people where they sort of go in when they're extreme hardship, they might be embarrassed to ask for help maybe. So I don't know, there's just a few things there in the bills that I've got. And the other part for me, I'm lucky enough to still have a job right now, and I would be actually open to helping others. So the industry might want to think about community support, and maybe, you know, if I saw that on the bill they said, look, you know, there's people living in your area that are in hardship and haven't been able to pay their bill, would you be willing to help out? I don't know if this would work, and there could be all sorts of issues all over it, but it might be something that the sector might want to think about, sort of getting other people in the community to help that still do have jobs and are able to pay their bills. So there's some ideas from me. But overall, though, I love the way that you guys are coming together to think differently and try and help.
That's great, Robin. Thank you very much. And when
it's Cass here. Thanks, Robin. Really great to have you participating, and also just picking up on Jenny's observations about the very fine balance between, you know, people's feelings of being shamed potentially, you know, by active direct contact, but at the same time, people needing to be accurately informed about what's available. It would be great to understand, because we're very aware that many people are not getting access to the rebates or concessions to which they may be entitled. How do we build a culture which actually is an appropriate sense of dignity about it is perfectly okay, and not even okay, but really important that you are accessing what you can in terms of what's available. So the written documentation on the bill is one example. But any views about what might work on that front in terms of active communication from retailers to customers, with both of your experiences of what doesn't work and what does work for people?
Well, as an example on the bill, because, we are in COVID, I mean, I even think, so something as nice as saying, we know it's been really tough for everyone in COVID, because I think, the continuity of service and the way that everyone's responded has been great. But even just having that saying, we know it's been tough. If you are experiencing, issues paying your bill, please, it's totally fine. We'd love to hear from you or something, just being quite out there. But when I got my bill, there's nothing like that at all. It's just the biggest bill I've had, and I know I'm okay, I can pay it, but I'm thinking if I was someone that was had just lost my job, I might be a bit embarrassed to ring if I didn't feel like it was going to be well received. So it's probably just that human element to it, because to your point, I don't think anyone really does necessarily want to be monitored, but they want to feel like they're not going to be shamed if they do ring in. Yeah. And I would worry about that, to be honest with you. I'd feel like it wouldn't be well received.
Robin, I'm really surprised to hear that there's nothing on the bill about assistance. I thought Victoria had some of the toughest.
I think it might be somewhere further down. I mean, there's so many graphs and everything all over the bill. But what I'm saying is, even on that first part, to say, and it could be just something as simple as we've been doing all these things through COVID to help. We do understand, it's tough right now, and if you do need to. So I just was trying to look before when we were talking, and I'm sure there's stuff in all the small print.
Now, that's a very good point, because it has been, I think there is even a project among the energy retailers to make the bills simpler. And I think it can be a very busy piece of real estate with a lot of information on it. And the question is, for you as a consumer, if you can't see that offer of help, which is, I think, one of the key things of a bill, then that's a problem.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think there's so many positives. I don't want to make it all sound negative, and there is a lot of information if I really want to look through it. A lot of it I just look at and I'm not quite sure what I'd do with it. But yeah, and maybe it's just particularly in the current environment, if it was overtly on that very first part to say we're here to help you if you need it, I think that would, and it doesn't have to be in all the small.
There should be on everybody's bill, on all retailers, if they're on the best plan for their retailer. And there should be something about if you need help and hardship. I think that came in with the reforms, maybe the 1st of January this year. I can't remember. There's been a few, because that was a requirement, not necessarily with COVID, but this extra information was supposed to be definitely about the better plans, but it's still up to the individual customer to ring up to change their plan, because they can't do it automatically, and I can't do it on behalf of a customer. They have to ring themselves. Yeah, but I
does say I'm on the best plan for me, and then if you go down, I think there's these, you can call a number but it doesn't really stand out for affordability. So
yeah. I agree that the bills are complicated and they can't make everything stand out, because otherwise we'd have 20 pages of, of important things to stand out. They are very complex, and every retailer is different. Yeah, I've got use. I think I've got everybody's a sample of everybody's for a training, if need be. So yeah, totally agree.
I will put in my own 2 cents worth there, because I've always been concerned about the difference in bills and information. It's the same product. It's the same product, and often the descriptors are different, and it can be very confusing for consumers. And I'd personally like to see a lot more simplicity and uniformity of approach, so people, whether they switch from one retailer to another, they recognise the same words and the same information. But maybe that's the project in simplifying the bills. Who else would like to make a contribution? We're rapidly running out of time, so I want to make sure that everyone who wants to say something has had the opportunity. Alex Bishop from Energy Consumers Australia, did you want to say anything wherever you are?
Sorry, I'm here. Hi, it's Alex Bishop here from Energy Consumers Australia. I'm at a bit of a loss in terms of what further I can contribute, because everybody's really covered the points that I wanted to make and have made them much more eloquently than I am. I feel really humbled right now, and it's been a terrific session to hear voices directly from the front line, and I think that's been really valuable today. I was going to make some similar points about COVID, but I just wanted to, there are a couple of things. One of the principles for this year too was about knowing the customer. And I think that efforts have really been made to get to know the customer. Either the work's already been done or it's in train now. And I think it's really been put to the test with COVID. And I do know from some of the disclosures that knowing the customer and trying to do better for the customer has really come shining through. One example is, as Robin was mentioning, I think there's one company who is, you can pay for somebody else's bills. So contributing to help ease the pressure of somebody else's bills. Now that's a really practical way to help the community. And for me, it's those little initiatives that speak volumes about a company, a signatory's culture, and its commitment to customers. So it's really human. And I think during time of COVID, we've seen some real humanity come out. And I'm sort of really humbled by this session today, actually. And so I think there are some good examples about how companies have stepped up to help the customer. And, you know, as we've said in other sessions, what we're looking at is how they continue to help the customer. Will this be, I think it was Claire, you said, how will this be embedded in BAU going forward? It's going to be a long time until we're out of we're not feeling the impact of COVID as businesses struggle to survive. You know, they won't be thriving for a long time, and customers, and particularly residential customers, when are they going to be back in the black, essentially? So it would be, you know, what we want to see is, well, what does year 3 look like? Year 2 has built well on the commitments from year 1, and we've seen some progress, and we have seen a commitment to customers. But what does year 3 look like? How will the initiatives that we've seen in year 2 be translated? Where's the ambition for year 3? What will happen? What are the plans and the focus for year 3? I think that's what we're really looking at from ECA, from our lens. But yes, today the feedback today has been terrific to hear, you know, some thoughts really from the front line. And also I've got 2 teenage stepkids, and the amount of times I tell them to turn off the lights. I mean, you know, the teenagers and their consumption, I think, is one of the bugbears of my existence. But yeah, it's been good to hear some really personal stories about how it's affecting, you know, residential customers, but also SMEs. So Doug's comments, I think, were fantastic as well. So my feedback for today.
Thanks, Alex. Now, any final, yes, Jared.
Claire, I just wanted to reinforce a point Jenny made about how many touch points it takes to escalate. I think that's a really good measure. I think it's great to see talk of embedding customer satisfaction measures and other KPIs across multiple disclosures, because it's that manage what you measure problem. But I think that one about how many times does the contact have to happen and how far does it need to be escalated? I was on a forum last week where I heard a couple of financial counsellors talk about feeling like they always have to escalate to get to that next step, where some of the disclosures have talked about a trust first approach that they've taken. So there's certainly some good practice in some of the disclosures on that area of practice. And I think it's you know, recognizing the COVID context and everyone's huge efforts to keep the lights on, literally. while COVID itself was something of a surprising event, that there will be events and that consumers in vulnerable circumstances will be affected by them is not surprising. So it's very much been about testing those systems, and that's why I think we need to be mindful of the COVID context, but also recognise that it sharpens our focus on what systems should be doing, which is helping those people who are experiencing additional hardship.
Thank you.
And sorry, it's Matt here as well. So I just want to reiterate what Jared said, but one of the things I'd love to see is a bit more consistency around support for vulnerable households. So like we'd prefer not to have to call up to get the support that they should have got from the initial phone call with their retailer, because there's a lot of times where they'll get, you know, part of the package of support delivered, but it won't be what they need, and it won't be until, you know, our team calls them up that they'll actually get that full package of support they should have got in the first place. So I think if we can just sort of get a bit of consistency around that, like it shouldn't be determined on who actually calls up. If the client calls up, they should actually get what they need, not need to have to then escalate it to a community organisation to take that they take that on board and push for that further support. So yeah, that's what we'd be keen to see a bit more of.
Yes, fair comment, Matt. Andrew or Cassandra, did you have any other questions or comments you wanted to make before I go to final comments from the group?
Thanks, Glitch. Something it's a little bit of a theme there that we've been talking and we've been focusing on this year and next year, but there's a sense that the scars of COVID will be seen for quite some time yet, and it's years 2, and I think Alex mentioned year 3 and beyond. So that's an interesting concept. I think we maybe out of hope we thought that we'd bounce pretty quickly next year and notwithstanding some negativity, but start to come good. But maybe it is maybe the scars are deeper than what we first thought. It'd be interesting to do some more work on that to understand the longevity of the impact.
As they say, long COVID. Cassandra?
Yeah, look, I just wondered whether any of you had a view about the role of the energy companies in ringing the alarm bells on what's needed for protecting people from being denied the essentials. Energy is an essential, of course, and Lois, you explained, for example, that paying the bill might become the most important thing, but actually we know that for many people that will mean a lot of other things as a going without. We're very conscious that a lot of the measures that have been put in place are temporary and might be masking over levels of debt that will become completely unmanageable. And what do we expect of the signatories in dealing with that trajectory? Potential growing levels of debt, people having to trade off on very essentials. Are we basically expecting governments to bail out, the levels of debt that might be being accumulated as we speak? And this is both on the household and the small and medium business side of things. Or the role of the businesses in an advocacy sense of saying, well, we'll do our bit, but this is what we need from other parts of the system, whether it's government policy or other measures. Any comments on that? Or that's just too hard for this time of the year and the time of the morning?
I think that's a bit hard with 6 minutes to go.
Are you concerned, Matt, or are you feeling reasonably comfortable that in this area, a lot of the checks and balances are in place?
I'm definitely concerned for obviously vulnerable households, but quietly optimistic that we've sort of shown that we can come together pretty quickly to come up with further supports. yeah, I'm just not real keen to go back to what we had previously, because that would be a bit of a nightmare for a lot of people.
Yeah.
One quick thing I just want to get out there before we run out of time, and it's probably a bit of a selfish thing from a community organisation's point of view, but I think that it goes back to what Jenny and Jared were saying with the communication for client or for customers, like making that as simple as possible. If they end up on a hardship program, like make sure that they've got a direct line to a support person there, so they don't have to go through all those checks and balances to get back to that support. Also for community orgs, we're finding, like Jenny, like we're finding our team is spending so much time on the phone on hold or going through different departments to try and get the actual support that the client needs. Like we need to really streamline that to take the pressure off it. Like we've got very finite resources in the community sector. So it really makes it difficult for us to support the amount of people that we need to support. So yeah, we're reducing how many people we can actually get through the system. So if there's a way that we can have a direct line to a community liaison sort of team that can sort of look after issues that we're seeing with our clients, that I think that would be really helpful. So then we're sort of taking out all 2 or 3 layers of questioning and having to go through the same conversation with 2 or 3 people. So, but I think anything we can make it easier for the customer to actually make that phone call and get that direct support without having all those hoops to jump through, like Jenny mentioned, will make it so much easier for the most vulnerable. So, yeah, I just wanted to chuck that out there.
That's great. Thank you, Matt. Well, look, we are running out of time. Unless there is anyone who really needs to make a final comment, I just want, and before I thank you all for your time, we, as you know, we've met with all the signatories, and those interviews are up on our website. We have had the disclosures. We've met with the Ombudsman to get their point of view. And we will be taking written submissions from anyone until the end of this month. And the submissions don't have to be anything fancy. They can be a story, a case example, some dot points, just to highlight the points that are most important to you. And so if you wish to send any further information, any reflections that come out of this meeting, please do, and just send it to, again, the information is on our website, but it's submissions@theenergycharterpanel.com.au, and we will be very happy to accept any further feedback. In fact, we very much appreciate it, to reinforce any of the points that have been made today, or anything else that you think of after this forum, and maybe coming out of the meeting with the Essential Services Commission of Victoria this afternoon. I mean, I think that will be, and we'll probably have a look at that as well, because I know that's a front of mind issue for the ESCV. So in saying that, it's only left to me to thank you for your time. I know everyone's really busy, and so we do appreciate you taking the time today, and for a very helpful discussion across a whole range of issues for all range of customers. So thank you very much. As I said, our report will be published on the 4th of December. And you can look for it then. So thank you, and Victorians, stay safe. I'm glad things are easing up for you a little bit, and I hope they continue to do so. So thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.